Hello and welcome to the Thursday Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove and I'm joined by a man who believes in the future. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, either cautiously with a little bit of optimism or like with way too much optimism. Either way, yes, I believe in the future.
So this is our review of the US Under-17s 4-3 victory over Mexico Under-17s in World Cup Qualifying. It's the CONCACAF U17 tournament down in Panama. What you're saying, cautiously optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've many different times have been like, oh, this is it. This is the player that's going to make it to the next level and is going to set the world alight and really push the United States to perform at a higher level. And then we kind of have to remember that a lot of these times, if you go back and look at U17 rosters of the past, many times it's like 3 will go on to be well known, or maybe 5 of a 23-man roster.
True.
It does seem like this
Not everybody
team,
makes it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It does seem like this U17 team that we're about to talk about and have been talking about has more players that seem more likely to continue on for a longer time.
I noticed you use the word seem a lot, like you're hedging your bets a little bit. Like, is it just that we're more familiar with this U17 team because, for example, we do the scouting reports, so we've got people, watching these young players for us. We've got access to, say, Top Draw Soccer that like profiles these young players. So like because there's coverage of them, because we know more about them, we just assume they're going to go on to professional careers and like represent the US national team.
Yeah. And I think it's also frustrating or confusing at the same time because when the United States fails to qualify for the U17 World Cup or the U20 World Cup,
the Olympics.
Yeah, we hear about how it's this disaster, about how it's setting the program back because now we don't have like players playing at a high level at youth level, and so they're not going to know what it's like.
They don't have tournament experience, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But then when they do, it still feels like there's an element of, and I saw it on Twitter last night, kind of a backlash of like, yeah, but they're 17. Who knows? Like, who knows if it really matters that much? And so it seems like you kind of can never win. And somebody's always going to be like, yeah, but still.
And I think that maybe the thing to keep in mind is it's not the individual players you have to get excited about, although it's inevitably who. We'll end up talking today about Andrew Carlton, about Josh Sargent, about Akinyola, right? We'll end up talking about the names and what those players are doing and maybe where those players are going. But maybe the thing to get excited about is the fact that the US program has put together a team that beat Mexico 4. You did Goalmouth this morning, our news show. What was the phrase, the stat?
I believe it was the first time ever in like World Cup qualifying
at U17 level.
And then at the same time, I think broke Mexico's 25-match unbeaten run in U17 World Cup qualifying.
So this is a significant win, right? For the US as a milestone, but also kind of in the US-Mexico rivalry, right? Because we're a little down after losing that game 2-1 under Klinsmann, right, in Columbus, I believe. Rafa Marquez late in the game. It was hard to take. But then we won that U20 game, and then now there's this U17 game. I'm not saying it swings the whole thing around, but it's, reasons to be optimistic.
I also want to say it's I think this is a Will Parchment stat, so I apologize if I get it wrong, but I want to say it's something like this is the first time a U17 and U20 US team have beaten their like counterparts from Mexico in competitive matches ever in history in the same year, basically. Or in the same year ever in history is probably the better way to say that.
All right.
So all that is to say that it is a historic win, and it's a really important win. And just like, I don't want to get too excited. And I think also because we do know some of these players better than other, there's that tendency to be like, oh, this is it. This guy's going to set the world alight. He is going to be the next big thing. I think some of these guys definitely have the potential.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't want to oversell and then have somebody mention the fact that, like, well, you're only talking about the one guy you know and not the center back or the left back who did really well too.
And Danny Zatela never ended up playing for the national team. And
that's the one that always kind of comes to mind.
Dominating in midfield?
Yep.
Well, there's one more that comes to mind.
Yeah, him too.
We won't mention him.
No, we're fine.
Okay, so shall we talk about the game? So the game was...
I guess we should.
USA 4, Mexico 3, in Panama, in a thunderstorm.
Yep.
There was definitely lightning. I'm not sure why the game was allowed to continue, but it did add a very dramatic element, right?
So did you see lightning? I mean, I know there was lots of thunder.
No, I heard the commentator saying lightning, and I heard thunder.
Okay.
But I heard that where there's thunder, there's lightning.
Is that how it works? I forget which one it is. I think it's where there's lightning, there's thunder. But I don't know these days. I just don't know. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works, though, because that's how you tell the distance. But anyway, so I wasn't sure about that. But it was definitely
so I'm just saying it added some drama.
A torrential downpour. And it did make me wonder, like, we sure this should be happening? Maybe you guys just can't reschedule this game, is what I'm guessing?
Our local league would cancel this game.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it is played on turf, though. So I guess there is that part. That maybe that's the benefits of turf. One of the few.
There's also the benefits of Josh Sargent.
Yeah.
So Josh Sargent, the centre forward for the United States, scored 2, assisted 1. We'll definitely talk about him in a bit. I'd like to actually talk about the US's approach to this game, like their tactical shape. I saw 4-3-3.
Yep.
I saw Josh Sargent as the lone striker with Andrew Carlton and Ayo Akinyola on the left and right wing respectively, with, I believe if you looked in their socks, they would be able to pull out a license to dribble. They'd been given a license to dribble by John Hackworth.
I'm pretty sure they might have their legal driver's license by now. Some of them are just now 16. I'm not sure about the individual state laws. But it seems like a lot of them have a license to dribble.
So I think they had a full license to dribble and a learner's permit for tracking back and defending. Because they also did a bit of that as well.
And which one of those do you have?
I'm not allowed to dribble ever.
Or drive, for that matter.
But I have a full permit to track back and defend.
Okay.
So, I mean, do you agree with me on that sort of shape? So it's like a 4-3-3 attacking and a 4-1-4-1 defending, because Carlton and Akinyola would come back ready to break.
Yeah, that's what I saw. And I think it really worked to the United States' advantage once they got settled down. Obviously, conceding a goal inside, the first 5 minutes doesn't really point to being settled, but I think it did. I think it's a credit to John Hackworth that they stuck with what they were trying to do and didn't freak out and adjust because they conceded early.
So, I saw kind of a press in the first 5 minutes, and then when Mexico scored in, the 6th minute, it was De La Rosa scored in the 6th minute, and they scored because the US pressed a little hard. Like Goslin, I think, the Atlanta midfielder, lost the ball, then like Durkin and Ferry kind of pressed up, and then Mexico were just able to bypass the entire US midfield and get behind the defence. Like, I could see there being a panic of, this press isn't going to work. They're just going to pass it straight through us. But instead, they stuck with it, and it ends up 4-3. Like that's is that mental fortitude, or is that just sticking with the plan?
I think it's sticking with the plan, and I think it's also John Hackworth maybe identifying that it's as much. Maybe that goal came about as much from like a formation or tactical problems. Maybe that was it, but I would say more so it was individual errors, because the United States kind of caught
it starts with Goslin getting tackled easily.
Yeah, and then maybe people not quite paying attention to their marks, and then I forget who it was who tracked back, but basically took the wrong approach.
It was Vasquez. So the two centre-backs were Sands, James Sands, and I think it's AJ Vasquez. And it's, Vasquez who weirdly goes the wrong side, right?
I think essentially, we've talked about this before, that the sign of a good striker is the ability to kind of like get ahead of the defender and then cut across their path, so that defender's either going to have to commit a foul and potentially concede a penalty and a red card.
You're saying that's what De La Rosa does to Vasquez?
He cuts across, but Vasquez overcompensates and runs to the outside. So it's basically like, instead of kind of their paths lining up, they make an X, and then Vasquez has to try to come back to get on the right side of him, and he just can't do it in time. So it seems like even with that high line, if there had been like a correct defensive approach on an individual level, they still probably could have prevented that goal.
And here's the thing, right? With U17s, you can point out so many errors. Yeah. We could say that Ferry, the other midfielder, and Durkin definitely step too high and allow Mexico to pass between the two of them. You can say Vasquez is stepping too high as well, because the reason he's chasing back on De La Rosa is that he's come too high to begin with, so he can play it in behind him. Yep. But I think if you get a bunch of so you're essentially talking 16 and 17-year-olds, ask them to play something of like a high-line pressing game to start, high intensity, there's going to be individual positional mistakes, right? These are not sort of seasoned pros who've like spent all their time in like in Diego Simeone's zones that he's drawn on the field, and you have to stay in the certain patches, right? You can only expect so much.
Yeah. I mean, it's also away in Panama, in a World Cup qualifier, in a torrential downpour on artificial grass. Like, it's definitely a lot of conditions that combined to make for potential big mistakes.
I think what I'm trying to say is that we are going to point out mistakes here, but we also are very aware that U17s make mistakes.
Well, that's
part of the game. Right?
That's part of the fun of watching it, I would say. Same thing, honestly, at U20 level. You'll still see those like horribly misjudged headers that lead to breakaways. You'll see like an attempt to clear that ends up in the back of the net. That's what happens for Mexico's third goal. It's an own goal. And so you will see those individual errors, but they do make it sort of like, that's part of the entertainment value, because you can never completely be confident that your team is going to deal with it properly, and it might lead to a breakaway or a fluke counterattack. And vice versa, the opponent as well.
Shall we talk about the US's equalising goal then?
Sure.
So it comes in, the 26 minutes? So 20 minutes, we're down 1-0 to Mexico in Panama. It's a little jittery, right? And then Josh Sargent scores, I'm going to say the goal of the game. Might be on for goal of the tournament.
For which reason?
Because this is the one where he lifts it back over his own head.
But what is it, just because of that flick? Because I would say that he actually...
for me it's that little trick that fools the Mexican defender, where he flicks the ball over his own head and the Mexican defender's head.
Except that I think he then under flicks it, so then he has to like kind of duck down and put one more head onto it. So it's not quite the like juggle over the top volley that you're kind of representing it to be. It's more of like a flick and then a head and then another touch and then a shot.
But then it's the thing that we say at U17 level, like not everything's perfect, but when you see him improvising the moment after he underhits the flick, doesn't he sort of like you see him like crouched down, right? Yeah. Like he's ducking something, like something going over his head, and just lets it roll off the top of his head into his own path. And then puts it between.
I think he takes one more touch though, and then does that. So it's kind of a combination there. I think all that is to say that for me, Ayo Akinyola's goal, the fourth goal, is the goal of the match for me, because it is on that. It's the beautiful lead up counterattack that allows him to score. But it's a first time goal, like kind of running on at an angle, and it's just the confidence to smash it far corner. That's what I like about that goal.
Okay, we'll get to that in a bit then, because Josh Sargent scores that goal, the equaliser,
which is an amazing goal. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, right.
But you could put me on the spot there, and I was like, is it my goal? I don't think it is my goal of the game. So I'm just trying to be honest.
All right, that's fair. No, that's fair. Okay, maybe we'll talk about as well Josh Sargent's second goal, the go-ahead goal in the 40th minute. It is not the goal of the game, unless you are judging goals by number of times you get shots on goal and try really hard. Because this is like shot blocked, shot blocked, shot blocked, shot finished from Josh Sargent.
Yeah, if the first...
He never gives up.
If the first goal was like knocking down a tree with one like swoop of the axe, this one was more like knocking down a tree with like 4 or 5 strikes of the axe.
That's what it was.
He definitely like shot blocked, shot blocked, shot goal, I think is what happened there.
He was like a lumberjack with a blunt axe who never gave up, and eventually the tree came down.
Exactly.
But I mean, no complaints, right? US is 2-1 ahead against Mexico with that goal. And while we're on Josh Sargent, this is why I wanted to talk about his goals. I kind of want to talk about him. Because he is with one of those development academies that is not sort of linked to an MLS team, right? So he's not like an obvious homegrown player for a team. I know what Sporting KC have the claim on him, but he has not necessarily committed to them. He's practiced with Sporting KC. He's practiced with PSV. He's practiced with Schalke. He hasn't committed anywhere.
But
I think he's going to be a big player.
I think so too. They have his discovery rights because he's in St. Louis, but St. Louis is within the kind of like 3-state realm of Sporting KC's reach. So I think he's trained with them, and I believe he's played with their... Is it the Swope Park Rangers? I think he may have had some training there with their USL affiliate as well. Could be wrong on that one. But I think it's still undecided if he's going to pursue MLS, if he's going to pursue college, or if he's going to pursue something further abroad. Yeah,
so like I said, PSV and Schalke have both had him go train with them. I want to make the case that I kind of think, based on what I've seen on him, which is only a few games, he's kind of a complete centre-forward. And he allows the US to play this 4-3-3, but with one lone central striker, because he can hold it up. He can finish. We definitely saw that. He can fight for balls, right? We saw him like muscle some Mexicans off of the ball to win it. And he's got a little bit of subtlety about him, as we saw with the flick over his head and some nice layoffs and stuff that he did. I want to compare him to Robert Lewandowski, big number 9 with a deft touch.
I want to add one little disclaimer there, just because when you say, and maybe I'm one of the ones who doesn't know, but I just want to clarify. When you say complete forwards, you don't mean he's like complete in his development,
like he's
ready
product.
to go.
No,
you mean that in terms of his all-around abilities in his skill sets, he is a complete attacker. He is not stand up top, boot the ball long to him, he'll play it off his chest and maybe get a header, or play it in space and he'll run onto it. It's kind of, he can do all of the different aspects of goal scoring.
He can do that very straightforward thing that you just said, but then he's also got step overs, he's got tricks, he's got, you know what I mean? Like with some strikers, like, oh, he's good, but he can't do this one thing. I look at him, and at U17 level, I can't name the thing that he can't do, and that's exciting.
His pie chart is a complete circle. He doesn't have like chunks missing from where he doesn't dribble enough or take people on enough or win headers enough.
Right.
He can do it all.
But because he's U17, his pie is quite small. It's like a mini pie. And we just got to wait for his pie to grow to like big hungry man adult size.
We're really working on these analogies today, the two of us. We got some weird ones going. I
believe they're similes.
Yeah, like or as a similes? All right.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
So are you with me on Josh Sargent? Because this is what... So I kind of cancelled at the top of the show not to do this, but I am very specifically excited about this one centre-forward, because I'm imagining like the 24-year-old version of this playing for the United States in a tournament.
I think it's also because he was probably the one, when we first started really paying attention to this U17 team, he was the one that we were maybe not as focused on.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of
Because he wasn't with an MLS team, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Right? Because you have Andrew Carlton, obviously. You've got Ayo Akinyola, who's playing with TFC2, but still. Yeah. And then you have Timothy Weah, who's with PSV. PSG, and everybody knows him and his dad. So, including, we got a scouting report about him. Should we get to that one now, or do you want to hold off on it?
Hey, whenever you want to do it.
Well, I'll finish this thought then. Basically, it's the idea that I think going into those friendlies where we first kind of got to know some of these people, I think we didn't know as much about Josh Sargent or just weren't as familiar with him. And so he's been one that because of that, we've kind of had, it was a blank slate. And so to see him, it really shoots up his stock, in my mind at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of Andrew Carlton, didn't score, did get an assist. We did get a scouting report, I believe, from James Jones, who's keeping an eye on Carlton for us. You got it there, Taylor?
I believe that you are correct. From James Jones, he says, Andrew bounced back from a rough game against Jamaica to help the U.S. Youngins defeat Mexico 4-3.
Oh, and a quick reminder for those who don't know, Carlton was subbed out of the Jamaica game for Timothy Weah after sort of dribbling into a lot of dead ends, essentially.
Yeah, and the same thing happened here. He was subbed out in like the 70-somethingth minute. I forget, 75th, I believe it was.
But less as a you're not doing anything, and more as a we're just going to get some fresh legs.
We want an energetic attacker who can run at people and maybe bust a counterattack. In this game, Andrew Carlton won the ball deep in the U.S. end and played to Blaine Ferry, who hit a long ball towards Josh Sargent, who finished to give Andrew the hockey assist. I believe that was for the first goal. Then Carlton assisted on Ferry's curling worm burner that gave the U.S. the lead for good in the second half.
All right, so focus on Andrew Carlton, because this is a name that people will want to hear about, especially listeners that maybe live somewhere in Georgia. Not naming any cities specifically. This was
Stone Mountain.
Yeah. Big soccer fans of Stone Mountain.
Yep.
Andrew Carlton did have a role in that Josh Sargent equaliser. I got, I think, overexcited about it. Basically, he tracked his man back and then intercepted a pass, and then he launched the counter-attack, as James said, for Sargent to score that goal where he flicks it over his own head. Right? So I was kind of very excited there. Carlton is this dribbler. Like I said, he's got license to dribble, learner's permit for tracking back. Did the correct amount of tracking back enough to win the ball.
Yeah, and I think you could see that really throughout the game, that he did a very good job of knowing when it was his job to step to a defender who was maybe trying to build out of the back, and when it was his job to drop back and kind of just play a more contained zone defensive system, essentially. So I thought he did a very good job of mixing that defensive approach, but then obviously still very much contributing to the attack.
And still adding things like roulettes. Like he literally did a roulette in the middle of the field. Like he still has that flair that has me excited to watch this US team. This is a US team that does unexpected things.
And to go back with that in mind, to go to that Ferry goal for a second, it comes about because Carlton gets the ball out wide.
This is the goal in the second half.
Yes, the worm burner, as it were. Basically goes at two defenders, cuts across, and then lays the ball laterally for Ferry to hit first time, goes into the back of the net. I thought he did a step over on that one. We went back and watched it. He doesn't. What he does do, and I'm not saying, full caveat here, I'm not saying he is like Leo Messi, but that is a run that Messi does, where he doesn't touch the ball, like he touches it in front of him and kind of does that the hip swivel where the defender doesn't know what he's doing.
It's the you don't know which way I'm going to go move,
exactly.
Right?
It's like lean left, lean right, back and forth, and then you just take one quick touch, but that little cut is enough to completely wrong foot the defender. So a second defender has to come out to try to block off like whatever Carlton's going to do. And I think this is your point, is that maybe it looks like they think he's going to try to come back inside and shoot. Yeah. And instead, he just plays that little lateral ball, and that's all it takes. So it's that combination of like skillful awareness and ability to kind of read a defender and then react to it, but then also play the simple ball to create what ends up being the game-winning goal.
It is
the game-tying goal, I guess, is what it would be.
This game is that goal makes it 3-2.
Right, but then Mexico pull one back, so it isn't in the end the game-winning goal. It's the 3-2 go-ahead goal, and then they get another one.
The go-ahead goal.
It's all confusing.
Such an American phrase. I'd never used that phrase before I came here, but this actually is a brilliant phrase. I think that I want to be taken on in England, because instead they fumble through different phrases to say go ahead goal.
Yeah, I think it works there. I think the one that I was trying to say, which then it wasn't correct, that drives me insane, is like the game-winning goal. If you win by if it's 5-0, the first person who scores is technically the game-winning goal. And so people will write that, and it's like, wait, what? How is that possible?
Maybe just don't say it. That's the way to do it.
That's probably the better lesson here. Yeah,
the first goal. The first of 5. For example. So for me, this was weirdly one of my favourite Carlton performances, because in some ways against
because you've seen so many hundred Andrew Carlton performances.
I've seen him against Turkey, Portugal, Brazil in those Nike International Friendlies late last year. And in some ways, it's like he was having too much fun. And this was more of a hard-working, more diligent performance where he still had an impact going forward. You know what I'm saying?
I'd agree with that completely.
So it gave me a little glimpse into the future of where Andrew Carleton sort of isn't just a flash player that you can't use. Like, he isn't like Tommy Thompson, but he's actually like a productive member of the team at a young age.
No, and I don't disagree with that, but I think that, like, kind of right there, like, I agree with everything you're saying, but that right there is what I'm cautioning against. Is that we are basing...
too hype on Carleton?
You're just like, this is the best I've ever seen him play based on 5 games? Like, it sort of is like, that's a pretty small sample size to then be like, look what he can do here and look how he can do this. So I think it's worth remembering that he's a 17-year-old who's not really making the squad, or at the best is making the bench for Atlanta United. It's not like he is, then going back to MLS and setting the world alight. So he still has a long way to go.
Absolutely.
But I'm very excited by the things I've seen from him so far.
Yeah, because these things made me think he can go that long way.
Yeah.
He can go the distance.
I'd agree with that,
so to speak.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about the man who scored that goal.
Sure.
It was Blaine Ferry, a guy I had never really paid attention to until, the start of this tournament. He plays for, I think they're called Solar Chelsea. It's another development academy that's not necessarily linked to an MLS team. That worm burner that James talks about, he really does. Like, it's way outside the box. Well, like maybe 5 and a bit yards out the box. So it's 23 yards from goal. It doesn't leave the floor.
Not really.
And it goes right in the bottom left corner.
It goes between the legs of a Mexican defender, which is, I think, why the goalkeeper sees it late. And then, as we said, it's wet turf, so it's going to bounce a lot. It's going to move a lot, and it's going to move faster than you'd expect.
So it's actually not a worm burner because no worms are dumb enough to be buried in turf.
Well, they put artificial worms in there. Just to give you like this idea that it is a real field. It's
a very nice touch from the turf manufacturer.
Gotta do something. And sprinklers in there just so you can, kill yourself at the same time. Although we have had many people confirm that they do water turf pitches before games.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? So the ball can zip a little bit.
There you go. As it did here.
So Ferry scores this goal, right? He also has that long ball for Sargent's first goal. And yet, quite a lot of times we saw him playing sort of not very good passes. I feel like maybe his job was to try and find Sargent long, and he was kind of underhitting a few of them.
I think a lot of the times he was maybe also in looking to play long would take that sort of setup touch to see where Sargent was, to see where his those wingers advancing down the channels were, and in taking that heavy touch, he would get the ball taken off of him. So it felt like he was consistently trying to build that big ball, and maybe wasn't as focused on the players that were immediately around him at times. But I think, and this is a point that you made that I kind of didn't agree with at first, but I've come back around to, is this idea that
a lot of my points are like that.
Yeah, well, sure. Let's not say a lot. Let's say
some of my points are like that.
But a lot of them are. But I think you're right that it is players sort of going at people having the confidence in the moment. And you'd rather see them trying to do that now and figuring out if they can. And then maybe as they progress in their education and as they get better and better coaches, they kind of learn what they can keep in their arsenal and what they should try to get rid of.
How does this apply to Blaine Ferry?
Because I think him looking for those long balls and trying to play the the packing stat ball where it splits 5 people and finds the striker in behind the defense. I think I'd rather see him looking for those now if that's what he's been asked to do. If he's been asked to play simple short lateral balls, then maybe I don't want to see that as much.
I actually think my guess would be, based on what we said about Josh Sargent, that some of the instructions were like, hey, let's play into Sargent, and he'll bounce it off his chest for Akinyola or Andrew Carleton to run onto. That would seem like a game plan, right?
Or just let him harass that defense, just put it in space, hang it up in the air, let him run onto it or bring it down or whatever he wants to do. But I think it was definitely backing his physicality versus that Mexican back line. All
right, so we're praising a lot of players. We should take time out to mention the one goal we haven't talked about so far, which was Mexico. We're a little bit out of order, out of sequence with the goals, but Mexico equalised towards the end of the first half. They made it 2-2. It was a cross into the box. I believe it's De La Rosa again, finished it. And it was James Sands, also in the Scouting Network, New York City FC centre-back, young player, who really completely misreads the header.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another way to put it would be that he was ball watching. And I think basically maybe just trusts himself to be able to win that ball against most other opposition, and maybe against Mexico's U17 national team. You don't quite have the leeway that you do in other situations.
So you think maybe James Sands thought he was taller than he was?
Yeah, or just maybe isn't used to a player who's 17 or 16 being able to play in like an inch perfect ball.
Yeah.
And so he's watching the player cross that ball and then I think kind of like doesn't really adjust to it, but just sort of is like, oh, I'm in the right spot. Yeah. And so then all of a sudden it's over his head and he has to scramble, doesn't scramble fast enough and it ends up in the back of the net.
I feel like he just pulled like 2 yards too close towards the ball and forgotten that you need to sort of be marking the guy behind you.
Yeah, and so you can see him kind of turn and be like, oh, well, I'm in trouble.
And that's 2 defensive mistakes from 2 centre-backs for 2 Mexico goals. Yep. And I feel like that might be this US under-17 team, is that maybe we were a little shaky at the back. Because, I mean, one, these guys are going to be exposed, like Vasquez was for the first goal, because we're going to press. And 2, maybe they're not the greatest centre-backs in the world. Like, when you think about this team, the standout players, it's not like with maybe the U20s where we're talking about Eric Palmer-Brown, or the previous U20 tournament where we're talking about Cameron Carter-Vickers and Matt Miazga. Yep. Like, the all-stars seem to be at the front instead of at the back. And I'm going to choose to not complain about that, but to be excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, wait, what?
Because it feels like more like a Brazilian team or something, where everyone's excited about the attackers instead of the defenders.
Wait, so to clarify then, are you saying that you're okay with like kind of a weaker defense as long as you've got goal scorers who can go out there and maybe win you 4-3, but maybe you lose 3-2 if they're having a bad day?
From an entertainment perspective, yes, but also from a talent perspective or from an approach perspective, I remember sort of US youth tournaments where we're kind of relying on our defenders, and it's just like bunker and hope something happens, where this feels more like you can sort of be less worried about a defensive mistake by Vasquez or a defensive mistake by Sands because you know that your whole game is not built on defend, and maybe score on a set piece.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, then I'm totally with you. For a second, I thought you were saying like, we don't even need a defense. Let's just put 8 forwards up top.
I'm the centre-back on this. You know what I mean? I'm the centre-back on this podcast.
Hence my confusion.
You can assume anything I say is pro centre-back.
I know. But absolutely then, I totally agree with you because even when the United States was ahead 3-2 and felt like a little bit, we're sort of like, okay, we just got to sit back a little bit and defend. Yeah. There was like, they're going to get one more goal. Like they're just going to, because there was so much attacking flair and so many players who it genuinely feels like need to score. It's not want to score. It's like, and they're a team. Don't get me wrong. Like they all celebrate together. They all seem to get along very well. But it is definitely when Ayo Akinyola gets the ball, when Josh Sargent gets the ball, you can tell they want to be shooting.
Absolutely.
Timothy Weah, I think, wants to be
fun
crossing. But yeah, but it is. So I take your point though that like you do have that kind of confidence that yes, we've just conceded another goal, but it does feel like we've got the firepower to maybe go back and get another. Whereas
plus that's worth tuning into to watch on YouTube.
Absolutely. But with U.S. teams of the past, I take your point that it was sort of like, oh no, we've conceded in the first 5 minutes. We don't really have the attacking power. Hopefully we can get something off a set piece. So yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, so this is one of those things where I make a point and it takes you a while to come around, but you eventually agree.
Well, just make it
I'm
faster.
saying there are many of them.
Make a clear point, then we'll get there.
All right, so
that one's on me.
We were talking about Ayo Akinyola. We also had a scouting report about Ayo Akinyola. It came in from Wes Kaufman.
Yep.
Wes says, AA, as he calls him, double A, I like the battery, had a picture-perfect counter-attack goal late in the second half as the US beat Mexico for the first time ever in a U17 CONCACAF Championship play. On to the second round, says Wes.
Yes, I also sent you a scouting report about Ayo Akinyola from me.
Can I read this out?
If you can edit it, sure. Oh, no, I think I didn't actually curse in that one. I think it was just paraphrasing the Dos Equis spokesman when I said I don't often yell at a 17-year-old, but when I do, it's Ayo Akinyola. Is that roughly what it was?
I have the exact wording, and it's I don't always scream at a 17-year-old to pass the ball.
Okay, I did curse. Cool.
But when there's a word missing. Yeah. But when I do, it's Ayo Akinyola.
Yeah, and then I think the next one was like he did it again, and then the next one was he scored.
He just scored.
Yeah, which is pretty much what happened. But
so is that like you take it back, or you stand by that Akinyola did not pass enough for you in this game?
I think it's one of those situations, and I think this makes sense and doesn't just make me like a fair weather person, but who knows?
Let's find out.
It's a situation in which if the United States had drawn this game or lost this game, and he had scored the goal that he scored, I would still be very upset with him. Because they won, I think I'm more inclined to say, like, yeah, he got the goal, and it was a really good goal, as I said. So they won and he got a good goal, that's fine. But there were just those moments where he should have passed and he had people wide open, and if he plays that ball, it's one-on-one, which is far more likely to score than shooting from 30 yards out. It was trying to do those little step-overs when it didn't seem like it was on it. It felt sort of like what I was saying earlier, that it was like, I need to get a goal. I want a goal. I'm going to make it happen.
But isn't that the thing, exactly what we were talking about earlier, where when at this level, it's kind of exciting to see players do this, because in the past we didn't have US players who had that dribble, attack mentality. And maybe it's better for them to do it at this age. And then when they play for professional teams, they'll get it beaten out of them. They'll end up playing in the system, but they'll still maintain some of that sort of ability to do step-overs in tight spaces when no one expects it.
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I would say to that is that I think Will Parchman wrote a good article. Was it Will Parchman who wrote the article about, again, cautious optimism for this team going forward?
Yeah, we retweeted it this morning.
And one of the things that I think the United States...
I'll link to it at the bottom of the show notes in today's episode.
There we go.
Yeah.
One of the things I think the United States has done historically at like amateur, U10 Richmond level all the way through is they sort of coach to win as opposed to coach to build play, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so with that is like you kick it long to the big kid, you back him to score against the small center back, you know? And I would say that if it was Akinyola being told, take people on, you have that creative freedom, that's one thing. But if it's John Hackworth saying like, do some quick passing once we get up top, like counter quickly, but then slow it down and try to find a good option, and he's just trying to do step overs, that's where it goes back to that sort of like, oh, he's fast and dribbly, so he's doing that and not playing within a system. It's just that he's not a big guy, he's just fast and dribbly. Does that make sense? Kind of depends on what he's being told to do. That definitely informs how I feel about what he's doing.
Okay, yeah. But this is me just personally being maybe sort of optimistic and excited about things.
Yeah.
But just seeing a player who is capable of doing that, even if they're doing it in the wrong place, doing it as a 16 or 17-year-old makes me just happy to see, knowing that he's going to get the rough edges smoothed out as he plays for, say, Greg Vanny's Toronto first team.
So when you watch this U17 team, is it more of like a holiday for you then? Because it's just more like, I want to watch these young players who could be potential stars someday, but right now they're 17, 16.
Yeah.
I want to watch them go out there and like have fun and show that they're confident on the ball and in their ability.
It's about adjusting your expectations of the sort of decisions players will make. Isn't there a thing that like when you're a teenager, your brain, there's some science on this, right? Your brain isn't fully formed. And that's why teenagers do stupid things. Like you've been a teenager, I've been a teenager. I did some stupid things, right? And then even like you get these guys who are playing for US under-17 national team, they're obviously functioning at a very high level, like intellectually and like sports-wise and everything, but they're still going to make bad judgments because they're teenagers.
Yeah.
Right?
Gosh, I forgot about that.
It's a lack of experience, and it's a lack of your brain being developed completely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. That's a good reminder, because you do have those moments when you're sort of like, I think you said that in the game, like the Mexico center mid like turned and tried to play it back to his center back and basically played it 40 yards out of bounds. Yeah. And you're like, what are you doing there? It's like, maybe that's it. His brain got a new wrinkle, and while that wrinkle was growing, he passed the ball out of bounds.
This is why teenagers have wild parties and then think their parents won't notice.
Yeah. Man, I want to go back in time and tell like high school Taylor, like all that stuff that you think that you're clever and getting away with.
Yeah,
you're not.
Exactly.
They know everything.
Exactly.
When you take your car when you sneak out, that's an obvious thing. They can see that.
So that's the equivalent of dribbling too much, right?
Yeah, probably.
All right, so we've got to talk about this. We've got to talk about this Ayo Akinyola goal.
Yeah.
Because, it's a great finish from Akinyola, right? But it's really the build-up is the most exciting. George Acosta is on the field.
Spoken like a man who said Josh Sargent's goal was the best goal of the game.
George Acosta, that's just a given. George Acosta was on the field at this point. He put my favourite pass of the game, I think, in behind Mexico's defence. It's a very, very clever pass.
And you were telling me like the reason why he didn't start, right? Because in the first game, I enjoyed what I saw from Acosta, so I was kind of bummed not to see him in this game.
My assumption is that George Acosta is more the playmaker, right? He literally wears number 10, let's put it that way, okay? But because we're playing Mexico, probably the toughest opponent in the tournament, I think Hackworth sacrifices number 10 and played two number 8s ahead of Chris Durkin. So you have Chris Durkin as the holding midfielder, the number 6, and then you had Goslin and you had Ferry as sort of two number 8s because you want to offer a bit more defensive solidity, and I would argue that it worked, right? So you sacrifice the more creative player to have some maybe more legs up and down, more physicality, which the US definitely had, right? They knocked Mexico off the ball several times.
Yeah.
But then Acosta can come on and slip in a clever little pass. Yeah,
and that's exactly what he did.
Sargent involved as well? I think it goes to Sargent, and then he squares to Akinyola. That's why Sargent has the assist.
That is exactly what happens. But it's the Acosta. It's confusing for a moment because it's Acosta who plays that great through ball, and then I remember it's like, so then there's 3 people in the attack, and it's Sargent and it's Akinyola, and it's Acosta. Because then he books it 60 yards.
Yep.
And he really is a viable option if Sargent played to the right. I think then Acosta's one-on-one
he has
on
a
the goal.
Yeah.
But instead, Sargent plays to the left, and that works out well because it's Akinola getting his goal.
Yep. Which I think he felt a lot happier about.
I think so, especially since it ended up being the all-important goal, because then we have the own goal in the 92nd minute, I believe?
91st, it says on my piece of paper that I printed out from ussoccer.com.
So yours is probably right.
So yeah, the Mexico's final goal that made it nervy, right? Because there was still, a few minutes to go?
Yep.
Jalen Lindsay with an own goal on his own line.
Yeah.
I think the cross comes across at a decent pace.
Yep.
Lindsay
it's
has
a
a chance.
low-driven ball, yeah.
He tries to just volley it clear. He slices it into his own net.
Yeah. And that,
Jalen.
That right there is, I think, the definition of what you were talking about with like the teenager trying to make the decision. And it does feel like he's maybe not been in this high pressure of a situation where Mexico are pushing everybody forward in a World Cup qualifier.
This is their first big tournament. Remember that for all these players, this is their first like CONCACAF proper tournament for like go to a U17 World Cup.
Yeah, and
there's no U15 World Cup, there's no U16 World Cup.
Yeah, and I do think that we've seen seasoned pros score own goals like this as well, but it had that feeling of like a young player who kind of knew that he just needed to instep it clear and probably could have, but in that moment he was sort of like, oh god, I don't want to hit this, and then he hit it with the outside of his boot instead.
So that aside, I thought Jalen Lindsay on the right and Chris Gloucester for the first half on the left did really well in terms of knowing when to overlap and offer options to Akinola and Carlton outside, and when to stay back as well, and looked kind of good when Mexico tried to come at the US like down the wings and try to dribble in field, kind of like Carlton did for our goal. When Mexico tried to do that, I thought Lindsay and Gloucester did a good job, with help from Durkin, of showing those Mexican players the outside.
I'm suddenly realizing all of the ways in which like the way you watch this game, it suddenly makes me like love you all the more, because I realize like you do definitely, especially with the US younger teams, you sort of like take ownership of the players, because Lindsay in the moments before that own goal, which I knew was happening, and I think maybe you didn't.
Yeah. Sort of, when New Mexico scored, I didn't know what happened.
You were like really excited about him, and you were really up on him, and you were like kind of cheering him on, and he like did that slide tackle to keep the ball from going out of bounds for a corner, and you were like, oh, I'm loving this, and then he scored, and I felt like you were emotionally impacted by that. Like, so I like that you kind of become this like weird thousands of miles away like cheerleader for this team that really takes it personally, and it then definitely informs why you're a bit more bit more inclined to get excited about this team, whereas I'm like, no, boring analytical stuffy armchair guy.
Well, here's the other reason I'm excited about this team. This is kind of a closing thought, right, before we move on from the under-17s and talk about...
Well, we've got one more scouting report about the under-17s.
Oh, yeah, and one that involves Christian Pulisic. So before we move on to talk about even more exciting US youngsters, is that I am, especially after reading that Parchment article this morning, which again I will link to in the show notes, I am taking this performance and the sort of the shape of this team with the exciting attacking players as evidence that the US is sort of starting to really develop players that are worth getting excited about.
Yes, because even with all the names we've mentioned, there's one that I think we only mentioned very briefly who comes on for Andrew Carlton. It's Timothy Weah, who, again, is, by all accounts, like the star player in the PSG Academy. Now, part of that is what he's done on the field in terms of scoring goals and being a big, strong player. Part of that is the fact that, his dad is the former world player of the year.
But nepotism only gets you so far, right?
It
doesn't get the ball in the back of the net.
And apparently it doesn't necessarily help him, at least in terms of talking about soccer, because Zach Betcher, who's scouting Timothy Weah, sent us an interview that Weah did with the Jamaica Observer. I guess Weah's mother is Jamaican, but he was born in New York. And when asked about how much his dad helps with his development, Weah said, "It's crazy because being in the house, me and my dad rarely talk about soccer. We talk more about food and my mom's cooking, and we talk about where we are going to go out next."
See, teenagers need to get their brains in order. Timothy Weah needs to ask his dad about soccer.
I think he did then say later on.
Get some soccer advice from George Weah, Ballon d'Or winner.
I think he basically, the implication he gave was that they don't talk about soccer, but when he asks, he gets the definitive answer.
Oh.
So it's sort of like when he says hey, how do you do, his dad tells him how to do the exact step over to set himself up for the goal. So it's sort of maybe he waits to hand out the expert insight until it's absolutely necessary.
Because he knows a long talk is coming. Yeah. Are we just extrapolating here and assuming this is what happens?
I like to think that they have a training pitch in the backyard that it's oh, you want to learn how to do this? Well, we're going to go drill for 4 hours.
I like to imagine George Weah's explanations and tips go on for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And Timothy Weah just wants to get on with his day. He's probably meeting some friends later. So he's very careful to not ask anything about soccer because he knows there's a long talk coming.
Yep. I think that's fair.
It's like I wouldn't ask my dad about DIY. Which shows
for
today,
any number of reasons. I think
he's really good at it, but it shows today why I'm no good at DIYs because I carefully never asked him because I get a long explanation.
It builds character, Daryl. It builds character.
Well, Timothy Weah better at soccer than I am at DIY. We'll say that.
I would say no doubt on that one.
I didn't make the PSG DIY Academy.
You did not, unfortunately. Yes, so that was wrapping up our U17 US coverage, except that we have a sponsor today, Daryl Grove.
Yes, today's show is sponsored by Fuji, the Fuji rebounder. Yep. Taylor and I play. We love to bounce the ball against the net, land it in the court, and then hope that your opponent fails to do the same.
That's really the strategy, isn't it?
Yeah. Just get it back.
Because anytime I try to get too creative and I'm going to place the ball in the back corner, I'm not going to place it 10 yards out of bounds. Yeah.
So this is the reason we like promoting Fuji. Is not just because they're great to work with. They're a great company. They've been really good to us. It's also that Fuji is, I want to say, it straddles the thing of what you call a practice device or a training device, and just a fun sort of possible beer in hand game that you can play. Right, it can be one. It can be one or the other. You can work on your technique, or you can just mess around and have a laugh.
Hamburger in hand or hot dog or veggie burger in some cases.
Yes, we did that a lot.
I think we did that in Lot 8 at RFK.
Yeah. So the question we set today is: if you were going to give a Fuji rebounder to one US under-17 player, whom would you give it, to whom would you give it, and why?
I'm going to go Ayo Akinyola because the way that I like to play Fuji is with unlimited touch, and then you pointed out that the proper way to play it is one touch.
Yeah.
And so it really simplifies your game, and it really makes you have to react faster. And I'm just saying maybe Ayo Akinyola can learn to play one touch passing and then develop from there.
Maybe with the rebounder, he'll also learn that if you pass the ball, it comes back to you.
That's a really good idea. Good point. What about you, Daryl?
I would go Jalen Lindsay for the simple reason that he could practice the clearance. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
So
just him, everyone else is trying to play it back into court, and Jalen Lindsay's just booting the ball clear.
Yeah. But someone you can just bounce the ball off the net to him, and then he just has to clear it and not sort of accidentally slice it past his keeper.
We should just buy him a tetherball pole in that case. He just has to kick it as hard as he can.
If our listeners would like to buy a Fuji, you can go to playfuji.com. It's spelled FUTCHI.com. We'll also put a link in the show notes that takes you directly to the page where you can get a good look at a Fuji rebounder, see what it's all about. And you can get a big discount if you use the coupon code TSS2017. That's the letters TSS and the numbers 2017. Put that into the checkout at the end. You will get a big discount. The biggest discount possible. That's true. Right. It's a true story.
Truth. Very true. So thank you to Fuji for sponsoring this show. Thank you to Kyle Staley for emailing in about Ousmane Dembele.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the final thing we want to talk about today. We alluded to it earlier because there's one more American to sort of talk about. But first, we're going to talk about Ousmane Dembele.
This is Der Klassiker, Pokal edition.
Kyle Staley says, Dembele played an interesting role in Dortmund's German Cup match versus Bayern Munich. He lofted across to Aubameyang to assist Dortmund's second goal. Later in the match, he curled a shot top corner for the eventual winner.
Kyle says German Cup match.
Yeah.
It was the semi-final. This is the goal that put Dortmund in the DFB Pokal final.
Indeed. But I think the reason why Kyle says I shortened this one, but I think the reason why Kyle says it was interesting is because Dembele did have sort of that Akinyola game where there was a couple of times when maybe he didn't need to dribble or shoot when he did.
That's Dembele's game, right? He is a little bit I'm going to take this ball.
And then he was involved in an incident late in the second half when it really did look like he had conceded a penalty, and instead Xabi Alonso got booked for a dive. And I don't necessarily know if it was a complete dive by Xabi Alonso, but I think that's where the interesting game comes from. Because usually when you score the game-winning goal, it's just a good game.
Yeah. Should we talk about that game-winning goal?
Sure.
So from my memory, because I only watched the last 15 minutes of this, he cuts inside in the 75th minute on, I believe, David Alaba, who's, no slouch when it comes to defending from left back. So he kind of fakes to shoot, sort of, cuts inside with his right foot, then he manages to bend it with his left foot into the top corner. 3-2 to Dortmund, and they finally get a win over Bayern at the Allianz. It feels like it's been a while.
It really, really does. And I think it also feels very important because they're not going to be winning the Bundesliga. They're no longer challenging for the Champions League, but it's an opportunity to get silverware, and it could be an opportunity for Christian Pulisic to get silverware.
This would be a big deal, right?
Yeah, he came in the final 10 minutes or so and kind of did the wide right role where it was, yeah, you can get forward a little bit, but mostly track your man, stay defensive, give us shape. And I think he did a good job of that.
Yeah, and I'm choosing to be very excited about this. I feel like that's my whole theme today, is choosing to be excited about things. It's disappointing he didn't start, right? We were hoping that Pulisic plays the whole game, maybe gets a goal and an assist, and we get to do a big excited show about Pulisic getting Dortmund to a cup final and beating Bayern at the Allianz. Yeah. Instead, what we get is Pulisic being brought off the bench in the final 10 minutes.
Comes later this summer.
In the final 10 minutes to do a defensive job against Bayern at the Allianz. And when you put that in context, the importance of those final 10 minutes to Dortmund's season, to Thomas Tuchel, he's only sending on a player who will follow instructions, like do something very sensible, be very trustworthy. So basically, I see it as putting a lot of responsibility in the hands of Christian Pulisic. Like, see this out. Normally, that's what you give like a 37-year-old veteran midfielder the job to go and do. Go see this game out. Instead, it's 18-year-old Christian Pulisic.
Yeah, and to that, I also want to add, though, that when Dortmund were trailing 2-1 early in the second half, I forget who the commentators were, but it's worth noting that it wasn't like Alexi Lalas and John Strong who have that American bias.
Yeah, because this was on ESPN too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The question,
and we know ESPN are not spending extra money, so they did not have their own commentary team. They probably just drafted in whoever was doing it for probably the British TV.
Yeah. But
I'll stop throwing stones now.
Early in the second half, the play-by-play commentator said to the color commentator, "What do you think they need to do here? What is the solution?" And his response was, "The obvious solution is bring on Christian Pulisic," which I thought was pretty amazing. That he's maybe gotten that level of reputation, and I really think it was that
the Monaco second half.
Yes, exactly, where he came in and it seemed like he was the catalyst that electrified Dortmund a little bit. It seems like maybe that was what people now expect of him, to come on and make things happen. And they even said, bring him on for Kagawa. Kagawa hasn't done enough. Pulisic can jumpstart this attack.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, but that's one version of Pulisic. The other version is what he did in this game, which was just to lock it down, right? So he can do both things. I feel like I'm getting too excited about Christian Pulisic here.
Is just the new motto of this show, a thing can be two things?
A thing can be two things.
There we are.
Stuff can be two things.
There it is. Stuff can be two things.
So, in the DFB Pokal final, I don't know the exact date, Christian Pulisic and Borussia Dortmund will face Eintracht Frankfurt and Timothy Chandler. So we could see, if Chandler plays right back, if somehow Pulisic plays on the left, we could see them go head to head or foot to foot.
Ooh, I'm excited about this.
Toe to toe?
Sure.
Any body part to any
body
part,
Head to head, chest to chest. Yeah. Shoulder to shoulder. Why not?
So I think that's going to be worth keeping an eye out for as well, because I'll be excited to see if Pulisic can win some silverware.
Yeah, or Timmy Chandler. Either way, an American is getting silverware.
Yeah, but you know which one we're more excited for, right?
Timmy Chandler?
Yeah, let's say that.
I would say Timmy Chandler only because I feel like Pulisic will have many opportunities to win silverware again. I don't know if Timmy Chandler will.
The window's closing.
Yeah.
Okay, final thing on the US under-17s. Yeah. Obviously, we beat Mexico. It's great. Yeah. That's only 2 games into the tournament. We're not actually qualified for the U17 World Cup yet, right? So what happens next?
All right, so basically there are currently 3 groups of 4. The top 2 teams in each group advance to the next round. And the way that works is then you've got 2 3-team groups. Everybody plays everybody in those groups. So basically the United States, they need to finish top or second of that 3-team group. If they finish second, they automatically go. If they finish first in their group, then they play the winner of the other group. Both of them automatically go.
That'd be the U17 championship.
Yes, but that will also be the championship. So they could go to the World Cup and be the CONCACAF champions.
But to roll it back a bit, we've only played 2 games, right? We beat Jamaica, we beat Mexico. Isn't there a 3rd group stage game to go?
There is, but I think either through goal difference or head-to-head, there's no way that they could be called. So they have automatically advanced as group winners.
Okay. So I believe they do play this weekend, but it actually doesn't matter. So you might see some rested players. Yeah. Maybe Timothy Weah does start this game. Maybe some other players will get their shot to play in the U17 tournament, and then the full strength team will be back for that second group stage. That's where it starts to get exciting.
And I would say this, for the concerns we had a while ago about the US's current group, because we had some fear about being in a group with Mexico and even that Jamaica could cause problems. Now the United States benefits from that in that they get the runners-up of Group A and B, I think it is, whereas Mexico, if they finish second, are playing the winners of Group A and the winners of Group B. That's likely to be, I think, Costa Rica and then Panama, the host nation.
Right.
So
Costa
the other
Rica
group is going to be real tough.
Is it Costa Rica, the other team that have won 2 games?
Yes.
So that may be the team to look out for if we get into a championship game, or we could end up a few games hence with a rematch against Mexico.
Also possible.
And maybe it all goes the same way.
Oh, boy. Lots to be excited about. Lots to play for.
Okay, so, Taylor, we better wrap up the show because we're off to do soccer trivia night in, 2 hours and 15 minutes?
That is correct.
It all kicks off. So, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Right back at you, buddy.
Listeners, thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with another Total Soccer show.